kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, who in thy wisdom and goodness hast appointed the office of rulers and parliaments for the welfare of society and the just government of men and women, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us, thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of important trusts in these islands. Let thy blessing descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we may treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of these islands and those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. And this we beg for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
Amen. Members, the House is now in session. Confirmation of minutes. Members, the minutes from the 9th of February have been circulated. Are there any amendments or adjustments required? There are none. The minutes will be confirmed, printed as confirmed. Messengers from the governor, there are none. Announcements by the speaker. The following members have indicated they'll be absent today. I'll omit the first two names I see. How's that? Because I see them present. The MP De Silva, MP Caesar, MP Scott, Lawrence Scott, MP Keynes, and MP Smith, Van Smith, are all indicated they'll be absent today. Messengers from the Senate, there are none. Papers and other communications to the House. There's one such paper this morning. That's in the name of the Minister of Finance, Premier.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honorable House of Assembly the 2023 National Economic Report of Bermuda.
Thank you. Petitions, there are none. Statements by ministers and junior minister. I believe we're all here for this statement this morning. Mr. Premier, are you ready to deliver your statement for today?
I'm not ready now, Mr. Speaker. I never will be.
Well, it's your call.
Mr. Speaker, we have entered the 20 to incentivize foreign direct investment. We now must add to the telling of the Bermuda story a caveat that denies that we are slaves to the 20th century and that we are fully engaged in the 21st. Mr. Speaker, I wish for the people to know that theirs is a 21st century government, eager to put technology to work in support of delivering public services, determined to provide for those Bermudians whose years of strength and vigor were spent building the society we now enjoy. Committed to fostering an environment in which our people can thrive economically and socially, and keeping communities safe as we nurture this generation of children through a reformed education system. Mr. Speaker, This progressive Labor Party government has always been mindful of the moment when entrusted with governing Bermuda. On the cusp of the year 2000, then Minister of Finance, the Honorable C. Eugene Cox, set out an ethos that is as relevant today as it was then. He said in February 1999, and I quote, "It is expected that in this statement, I should quote averages and aggregates, means and medians, populations and percentages, and in due course, I shall do that. But while delivering broad brush statements, it is too easy to paint over life's cracks and crevices through which the individual falls. In extolling the above average achievements, it is too easy to ignore those who exist below the average, who do not reach the above average household incomes, who do not have enough to pay average rent, and who cannot afford the above average increases in healthcare costs. It is the job of the government to implement economic policies that will present opportunities for all to advance and benefit from the economic success of Bermuda." End quote. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Cox's comments then apply to today's statement because we will set out a picture of economic growth and success realized in Bermuda. But we do so recognizing that these are not laurels on which to rest until that success is more fully felt by the people we serve. A key difference between us and the opposition as it is constituted today, or as it existed in Mr. Cox's day, is that the balancing of the budget is not achieved on the backs of people, but it is delivered with the people at the center of the success. We take the government's above average performance and use it to invest in our people. No victory lap until the race is made fair for all, and no end to serving the people until the people enjoy the success occasioned by their manifested trust in this government to deliver a fairer and better Bermuda for all. Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we invest in infrastructure, we invest in education, we preserve access to healthcare while reforming the system, we strengthen the social safety net, we make affordable housing a priority, we make home ownership available to more Bermudians, we make our island safer, we invest in the young people of this century through scholarships and education awards. Mr. Speaker, this is no fluke. The ability to do these things and deliver a balanced budget for the people of Bermuda has been achieved through fiscal prudence, sound debt management, preserving and growing investor confidence, and delivering on our promise to reduce the tax burden on the working families of this island. Mr. Speaker, since the height of the pandemic, we have reduced inflation rates, grown our economy while reducing our deficits, and moved our country towards a balanced budget. Our government can point to many statistics to highlight our success. We can show in so many ways, backed up with facts, that we are taking the country's finances into a better, stronger direction. We can also point to many initiatives that have been put in place to reduce the burdens on Bermudians, and we can point to greater protections for our workers in the workplace. Mr. Speaker, what I say next will be very important to the Bermudian people. Yes, by nearly every measurement, the economy is headed in the right direction. Yet we know that too many Bermudians are not feeling the impact of it in their lives. Too many continue to struggle with high food prices, while businesses boast about their profits. Too many face growing rental costs and shrinking housing options. From groceries to healthcare to mortgage rates, the escalation of prices in Bermuda is causing an escalation of financial hardship and frustration. Mr. Speaker, in this government, we know that the best economic statistics in the world mean little when our people are not feeling it in their daily lives. We know that even if other islands around the world are experiencing similar challenges with the cost of living and housing, it is little consolation to say that things are better here compared to other places. We also know that these frustrations are compounded by the condition of our road infrastructure and the impact it has on the quality of our life and the condition of our vehicles. All of this serves as a humble reminder that though we have made significant progress, and though Bermuda has seen lower inflation than other jurisdictions, we haven't gotten everything right. More must be done, and this government remains determined to address these issues and improve the lives of our people. Mr. Speaker, the increase of the cost of living is, at its core, a product of our small size, our need to import nearly all of our goods, and the fallout from wars, supply chain disruptions, and rising interest rates overseas. Mr. Speaker, the rate of inflation in Bermuda has been steadily declining over the last year, and we are encouraged to see that it is now at 2.4%. Government policies such as the elimination of duty on staple goods, reduction of the sugar tax, freezing of fuel prices, reduction of payroll taxes for all local businesses, and 86% of the workers in Bermuda, the 2-year freeze on government health insurance premiums, the reduction in vehicle license fees, all of these play a part in doing what we can to slow the rising cost of living and reduce the impact of global inflation here at home. Now, Mr. Speaker, moving on to the global economy. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, the global economy faced higher interest rates, tighter financial markets, increased debt pressures on both households and businesses, a slowing of global demand, and continued geopolitical conflict. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the global economy will grow by 3.1% in 2004, 3.2% in 2005. Growth in advanced economies is projected to decline slightly from 1.6 in 2023 to 1.5 in 2024, before rising to 1.8 in 2025. The United States growth is expected to fall from 2.5 in 2023 to 2.1 in 2024 and 1.7 in 2025, driven by the effects of tighter monetary policy and the eventual tightening of fiscal policy. On the other hand, growth in emerging markets and developing economies is expected to moderately increase to 4.1% in 2024 and further rise to 4.2% in 2025. Global inflation is expected to continue its downward trajectory, falling to 5.8 in 2024 from 6.8 in 2023, and further to 4.4% in 2025. Mr. Speaker, while the current tight monetary environment has dampened global inflation, uncertainties remain regarding the speed, strength, and unevenness of monetary policy and inflation persistence. Central banks holding policy rates higher for longer periods can result in increased credit and financial stability risks. Tighter credit conditions can hinder investment, consumption, employment, housing markets, and general economic activity. In addition, there is potential for unfavorable supply shocks to recur in the global commodities markets. Markets remain tight, and there are still risks for supply disruptions in the gas, coal, and oil markets. An escalation and spread of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East to neighboring economies could impact energy prices. Favorable scenarios, of course, include faster disinflation and easing of monetary policy and increased global demand and investment. Mr. Speaker, I will now focus on the Bermuda economy. Bermuda's gross domestic product, the primary indicator for growth, is estimated to have grown between 4 and 4.5% in 2003. Mr. Speaker, this is following on an expansion of 6.4% in 2022. This is as a result of the continued positive economic performance by new international business registrations, visitor spending, higher employment and employment income, and greater household consumption. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda continues to see a growth in international business. 2023 saw 569 new company incorporations for the first 3 quarters and a 4.6% increase in jobs, with 215 jobs being filled for the full year. This sector now, Mr. Speaker, provides 4,909 jobs in Bermuda, the highest ever recorded, surpassing the previous peak of 4,761 jobs in 2008, before the Great Recession. Mr. Speaker, the latest annual GDP estimates for 2022 show the value added for the accommodation and food service sector grew by 40.5%, surpassing pre-pandemic levels of 2019. This was driven by a $123.4 million value added for accommodations as visitors resume regular travel. The tourism sector has seen continued recovery in both arrivals and spend during 2023. Leisure air arrivals increased by 21.9% and cruise arrivals by 30.5% compared to the prior year. Total air visitor spend reached $341 million, up 26.4% from 2022, and total cruise visitor spending totaled $151 million, up 46.8% from the prior year, surpassing pre-pandemic levels. Further, the superyacht sector attracted 56 visits with an estimated economic impact of $2.9 million. Revenue per available room increased by 22.6%, driven by an increase of hotel occupancy of 15.5% and a 6% increase in the average daily rate. This uptick in overall tourism activity has also resulted in the second consecutive year of job growth to the sector, which added 339 jobs, bringing the total number of jobs to 3,636. Mr. Speaker, the construction industry for the first half of 2023 experienced a decline in the value of new projects started and estimated value of work put in place. The value of new projects started declined by 50.5% and the estimated value of work put in place by 7.7% when compared to 2022. This reduction is primarily due to less hotel and guest house related construction projects occurring in the first half of last year. Despite the reduction in construction activity, employment in the sector remained constant when compared to 2022, totaling 2,054 jobs filled. That, however, is expected to change in 2024 with the Fairmont Southampton renovation, the Brookfield building on Front Street, and the Morgan's Point development advancing. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's overall rate of inflation remains relatively low when compared to advanced economies, as reflected in the Consumer Price Index, which indicates an annual inflation rate of 24% for September 2023. Bermuda's balance of payments continues to record relatively large current account surpluses, which are an important strength of the Bermuda economy. Bermuda's total current account surpluses over the first 2 quarters of 2023 was recorded at $671 million. Mr. Speaker, sustainable economic growth cannot be achieved without an expansion of jobs within our economy and a reduction in unemployment levels. This government continues to deliver on increasing number of jobs in the Bermuda economy despite global headwinds. In 2023, the total number of jobs filled in Bermuda increased by 935 posts, or 29%, growing from 31,914 to 32,849. Employment levels have been driven by record levels in the international business sector, a recovering tourism sector, and the professional, scientific, and technical sector, which collectively represented 68.8% of the total new jobs filled in 2023. Employment growth was observed in employment income across all sectors for the first 2 quarters of 2023. Overall employment income was estimated to increase by 6%, or $121.4 million when compared with the same period in 2022. This increase was driven by the international business sector, which saw an increase of $51 million, or 6%. The hotel and restaurant sector showed the largest year-over-year growth, increasing by 21.6% versus the prior year. Mr. Speaker, total gross turnover in the retail sector also experienced an increase. For the first 8 months of 2023, total gross turnover stood at $809.4 million, 3.1% or $24.7 million higher than the same period in 2022. Mr. Speaker, we are trending in the right direction, and many of our major economic indicators continue to signal moderately strong recovery from the pandemic and recent geopolitical conflicts. Employment and employment income continue to show robust growth. Inflation continues on its downward trend, and tourist arrivals are nearing pre-pandemic levels, while average tourist spend is above pre-pandemic levels. Though the current environment has led to a faster than expected fall in inflation, we are facing some of its after effects. The people of Bermuda and local businesses have experienced the impact of higher global interest rates, placing additional pressure on family budgets with higher mortgage payments. While local retail sales continue to grow, retail sales volumes are down. On the upside, interest rates are expected to fall in several advanced economies in the latter part of this year, inclusive of the United States, which should lead to lower mortgage rates in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda still faces several external risks: a prolonged high interest rate environment, geopolitical tensions, slower global demand, and of course, climate-related risks. It is for these reasons the government is committed to returning to a balanced budget and eventual budget surplus, creating the fiscal space to dampen potential negative shocks to the Bermudian economy and to protect the welfare of Bermudians. We must execute our economic development strategy to ensure Bermuda stays on a sustainable growth path, remains globally competitive, and builds upon the country's established A-class rating amongst international bodies. Mr. Speaker, we wish to speak about credit ratings and independent analysis of the Bermuda economy. Mr. Speaker, with some local media seeming deeply invested in undermining the work of our government and damaging the reputation of Bermuda across the globe, it continues to be critically important for the government and the people of Bermuda to earn an independent, non-political evaluation of our fiscal performance. Beyond refuting the narratives of those who care more about undermining the government than collectively working towards the success of Bermuda, assessments from world-leading, highly regarded agencies and committees also help retain and attract new businesses to the island, ultimately benefiting our people and our economy. Mr. Speaker, in their May 8th, 2023 ratings report for Bermuda, S&P reaffirmed Bermuda's A-plus long-term sovereign credit and senior unsecured debt ratings, as well as its A1 short-term rating and its AA+ transfer and convertibility assessment is stable. With their report, S&P highlighted they expect the local economy to, and I quote, they expect the local economy to remain healthy, supporting government finances, limiting the need to increase gross debt, and supporting the territory's external position, including current account surpluses, end quote. KBRA's October 6, 2023 ratings then solidified the S&P assessment as they affirmed Bermuda's long-term rating at A+, with a stable outlook, while the short-term rating was affirmed at K1+. KBRA stated within their report that Bermuda's ratings reflected its commitment to fiscal restraints and consolidation, even if slightly delayed, the ongoing recovery of tourism, and KBRA's expectations for durability in its status as a financial hub. Moody's, in their 2023 ratings report, reaffirmed Bermuda's A2 issuer and senior unsecured bond ratings, along with a stable outlook, indicating that Bermuda's bonds are seen to be of good quality with low credits or default risk. The stable outlook reflects Moody's expectations that fiscal consolidation efforts will stabilize debt around current levels due to the rebound in tourism activity and strong growth in the international business sector. Mr. Speaker, these ratings are an objective endorsement of the government's fiscal and economic policies, which are aimed at strengthening the economy as the country rebounds from the COVID-19 pandemic. We must also acknowledge the independent assessment of the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, tasked with assessing Bermuda's fiscal strategy with a focus on public spending, taxation, borrowing, and debt reduction. In their December 2023 report, the panel stated, and I quote, Bermuda now has a significant primary surplus. It has done well over the last few years to maintain a creditable path towards a balanced budget, despite a number of adverse shocks, most obviously the pandemic. Spending has generally been kept under control, and steady revenue growth has therefore largely fed through into deficit reduction, end quote. Mr. Speaker, these are independent endorsements of the government's fiscal and economic policies, do not naturally align with the narrative of the combined opposition. Consequently, the people of Bermuda must ask themselves, should we trust the words of globally recognized, politically independent assessment agencies, or the negative narratives being promoted by other, arguably less qualified and less objective entities? Regardless, we will uphold these high standards and ensure that our work goes beyond global recognition and into real and positive impacts on the lives of the most vulnerable Bermudians. 6 years of continued progress. Mr. Speaker, since being given the humbling responsibility to serve our people back in 2017, our government has fought to reduce the financial burden on the lives of those who work tirelessly but still struggle to make ends meet. We have fought and will continue to fight for greater economic inclusion, greater economic parity, and greater social mobility. While we cannot claim to have gotten everything right, we remain steadfast in the belief that executing on the values, aims, and objectives of our political forefathers benefits our people far better than slashing scholarships and social programs through austerity and only representing the viewpoint of the elite and the privileged. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with the values and beliefs of our Labor Foundation history, over the last 6 years, we have committed to policies that increase social protections for our workers and ensure higher income earners pay their fair share, while providing relief for the average worker. That last fiscal year marks this Progressive Labor Party's 4th reduction in payroll tax for the majority of Bermudians. Our tax cuts have saved the average Bermudian worker over $5,000 since we've been in office. Some, Mr. Speaker, have saved up to $9,000 since we've been in office. If we had kept payroll tax rates at the level that the One Bermuda Alliance had left them, the average worker in this country would have seen $5,000 more come out of their paychecks, and the impact of the global cost of living crisis would have a far deeper impact on Bermudian families and their ability to make ends meet. It's important, yes. We also reduced payroll taxes for all local businesses, including the elimination of payroll taxes for self-employed fishermen, farmers, and employees with disabilities. This level of tax reduction has provided many local businesses with much needed relief, helping them to continue to operate, continue to hire more workers, and continue to grow. In further support of local businesses and to encourage job makers, the government also arranged for new businesses to receive a 1-year payroll tax holiday, which has resulted in a wider range of job opportunities in Bermuda. We also doubled the guarantee capacity at the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation and increased funding to further support our hard-working entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, one of the crowning achievements of this government in 2023 was the implementation of a minimum wage for the first time in Bermuda's history, and setting it at a rate that makes it one of the highest minimum wages in the world. Our government ensured that no worker in this country will be denied the opportunity to earn a fair day's pay. Mr. Speaker, this Progressive Labor Party government is rooted in its support for our workers. But yes, we also revere our seniors. We understand the challenges many of our seniors are facing. And while the opposition told them money doesn't grow on trees, we are committed to ensuring that our seniors' incomes keep pace with inflation, thereby helping to protect their standard of living, and have delivered pension increases at or above the rate of inflation since 2017. We also eliminated land tax for nursing homes and amended legislation to provide for better standards in our care homes, as we appreciate the valuable services these facilities provide to our precious seniors. We expanded the personal home care benefits, introduced local radiation therapy coverage for future care and HIP, increased the future care drug benefit from $2,000 to $3,000 a year, and also introduced interest-free improvement home loans of up to $15,000 for families needing assistance to make their homes more senior friendly. Mr. Speaker, along with our workers and seniors, this government views the family unit as the nucleus of our society, which is why this government continues to find ways to provide relief for Bermudian families as part of a people-centered economic recovery. This government recently enhanced the child daycare allowance, increased the amount of money available to families while expanding eligibility, allowing more parents to gain access to quality childcare, which is essential for our island's future. And to support childcare providers, we also eliminated duty for childcare centers, helping to drive down their expenses. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, we announced the highest level of employment in international business in Bermuda's history. This achievement is proof positive that this government's economic policies are working. 6 years ago, in our first budget, we ensured that every Bermudian was able to attend Bermuda College, regardless of their financial status. We doubled scholarships to invest in higher education for Bermudians. We expanded training programs to upgrade the skills of Bermudians displaced from the workforce, and we worked with our international business sector to significantly expand internship opportunities for young Bermudians. 6 years later, Mr. Speaker, we see the result of those actions. Not only are there more international business jobs in Bermuda than ever before, but there are more Bermudians employed in the international business sector than ever before, with 506 more Bermudians working in international business than in 2017. Yeah. These 506 Bermudians are earning good wages, moving up the corporate ladder, and setting an example for the next generation. Mr. Speaker, this is not by accident. It is not a fluke. It is a result of a government that has, for the last 6 years, invested in our people and invested in our future. Standing with our workers, standing with our seniors, standing with our young people, standing with families and our children. That is how we maintain the values of those who came before us while building a better future for all Bermudians. Public sector employment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the opposition quite often has the same talking points when referring to Bermuda's public service. They love to rally their base, claiming it is overstaffed, and accuse the government of expanding its size, while consistently advocating for privatization. However, as many Bermudians have learned during their one term in government, there is often a huge difference between what they say and the facts. In July 2017, the total number of persons employed by the government was 4,661. While recently, as recently as December 2023, that number was 4,469, which means there are 192 less people working for the government than when we took office. Rather than shoving hard, honest workers out on the streets, the way the opposition and their online cheerleaders want, we have prudently managed the modernization and streamlining of our government. It should also not be forgotten that this Progressive Labor Party government has increased pay while keeping health insurance rates steady for our public officers since returning to office in 2017. We've treated them as human beings rather than numbers on a ledger to be victimized, and still ensure that the government's total monthly payroll cost is approximately $270,000 less than it was in the OBA, without demanding that they take furlough days. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the opposition is making it up as they go along, parroting baseless claims spun by their political consultants in order to appeal to their voter base who are hostile to our public officers. But the data clearly reflects that this government has controlled the growth of the public service. Mr. Speaker, last year, the Honorable Minister of Economy and Labor unveiled Bermuda's economic development strategy, which sets out a roadmap to sustainable economic growth and development for Bermuda. The economic development strategy has 5 strategic priorities: the expansion of local and international business, attracting new business and foreign investment, the development of entrepreneurship and small business, the continued execution of the government's economic recovery plan, and certainly, but not least, investing in our people. This government firmly believes that a thriving business environment is critical to the success of our economy and supports our quality of life and community. To that end, the government is committed to the execution of the strategic priorities and improving conditions for businesses to set up, grow, and operate successfully. Mr. Speaker, the government is proud to see a number of initiatives completed which already demonstrated positive results. These include a legislative framework that established Bermuda's subsea communications sector, which has attracted Google to set up operations in Bermuda. Dozens of young Bermudians on the path to home ownership because of the government's mortgage guarantee program. The economic investment certificate injecting over $414 million into our economy. The investment in affordable housing, which has delivered 67 new affordable units. And the BDC's COVID-19 support program, which successfully supported a range of small and medium-sized businesses during their darkest hour. I must emphasize that this is our strategy to grow and diversify our economy. This is our strategy to enhance Bermuda's value proposition. And this is our strategy towards a prosperous Bermuda. Any suggestion that the government has no economic plan is simply not true. The economic development strategy is specific in detail, including action items, and I would encourage everyone to read the strategy to get a better appreciation of the direction that this government is heading. Mr. Speaker, it should also not go unnoticed that the economic development strategy was debated in this honorable House and passed without any objection. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the opposition for erring on the side of bipartisanship, as I believe we can all agree that this strategy is the right path forward to achieving our goal of a better and fairer Bermuda.
Well done. Well done. Thank you. Well done.
It's good to wake it up now, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've got a ways to go.
We have a lot of writing to do for next week.
Mr. Speaker, in the government's 2020 election platform, we pledged to work with local banks to provide security for mortgage loans to reduce interest rates charged. In October 2022, the government launched its mortgage guarantee program, where the government provides a partial guarantee to support local mortgages with the Bermuda Commercial Bank. In return, the bank is offering reduced interest rates starting at 5% and also reduced down payment requirement from the standard 20 to 10%. With this program, we're not only reducing a first-time homeowner's monthly repayments, but also reduce the down payment requirement as well, make it more affordable for Bermudians to own their own home. Mr. Speaker, we are currently in the second of 3 phases, where any first-time homebuyer, no matter their age, is eligible. Also, as part of the second phase, all public officers with existing mortgages at other institutions are eligible to transfer them to Bermuda Commercial Bank to participate in the program. I'm also pleased to announce that beginning April 1st, we're expanding phase 2 to include employees of government quangos and part-time regiment soldiers who will now also be able to transfer their mortgages into this program. To date, over 49 applicants have been approved or on the path to home ownership or lower mortgage rates. That is 49 Bermudians and counting who are able to own their own piece of the rock, who may otherwise not have been able to do so without the forward-thinking policies of this progressive Labor Party government.
Yes, well done.
But Mr. Speaker, it is important to recognize that, not everyone wants to buy a new home. And there are some banks in this country who have raised interest rates significantly over the past few years. And so we must make mortgage transfers easier. Mr. Speaker, last year the government made several amendments to the Stamp Duty Act, one of which ensures that the refinancing or transferring of mortgages $1 million or less no longer incur any stamp duty fees, while those in excess of $1 million would only be subject to stamp duty on the excess amounts. With these changes, the government seeks to create a more competitive environment amongst our local banks which will in turn help put the power back into the hands of the consumer. Put simply, if someone with a mortgage of $1 million or less is unhappy with their mortgage rate and is offered a more favorable rate at another bank, this government has made it possible for them to transfer their mortgage without incurring any government taxes.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, one of the positive aspects of the government's work is the fact that Bermuda will see 3 major construction projects commence this year. The Fairmont Southampton project, second, the Brookfield building on Front Street, and third, the Morgan's Point development. Mr. Speaker, we have all heard the announcements from the developer regarding the work starting at the Fairmont Southampton Hotel. And I know that all residents are eagerly anticipate the site renovation works and eventual reopening of this hotel. The projections are this project will create 700 jobs during its construction phase, which is scheduled to last for 15 months. Demolition works have also commenced on Front Street for the new Brookfield building. And this project is projected to add 200 jobs over the next 18 months. This will deliver a modern building, removing boarded-up windows and replace them with prime retail and office space. This investment by Brookfield is a vote of confidence in Bermuda.
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, last year in the budget statement, I outlined the government's vision for Morgan's Point. And over the last year, we've been preparing the groundwork to commence the development phase of this project and immediately add high-end housing stock to the country as support for the significant demand from our growing international business sector. The additional of rental capacity by way of completion of partially constructed buildings is the best way to reclaim value at the site with the lowest execution risk. It also supports the work of design and development of a wider spectrum of rental units on the site to address the pressing housing needs at all levels. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we must remember that there was a wide variety of housing that is planned there. And so the first phase is the buildings that are already there, but then there's the new buildings to be constructed. The government is working to finalize the Morgan's Point Development Company board, and discussions have already been held with local banks to finance the first phase of construction of the 5 buildings that have been partially completed, which will add an additional 35 units to Bermuda's housing stock. Importantly, it is the view of the government's advisors that this initial phase of the project will not incur any additional expense to the government. And once completed and rented, the cash flows from this phase will exceed the cost of repaying the incremental borrowing, which is the approach intended at each following phase. Mr. Speaker, it is vital that we continue to stay the course by adhering to our economic development strategy, which builds on our economic recovery plan that has yielded positive economic growth, a recovery of jobs since the pandemic, unemployment falling to lower than pre-pandemic levels, and record international business growth and jobs in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, our economic policies are working. They are delivering balanced economic growth, and that growth is translating to stronger than expected tax revenues, leading to solid fiscal performance. Mr. Speaker, the annual financial statements for fiscal year 2022-23 are still being audited and will be tabled in this honorable House when they are complete. Notwithstanding, I will share the fiscal performance highlights of the last fiscal year with honorable members and the country today. For the fiscal year ending March 2023, total revenue to the government was $1.127 billion, which was $49.3 million or 4.6% above the original estimate of $1.078 billion and $45 million above the previous year's revenue of $1.06 billion. It should be noted that in spite of not receiving $30.1 million of budgeted revenue due to the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on the aircraft register, foregone customs duty from the freezing of fuel prices, and foregone customs duty as a result of eliminating duty on essential goods, the government exceeded the original revenue targets.
Well done.
Mr. Speaker, current account expenditure is anticipated to be $971 million, just $2 million above the 2022-23 original estimate of $941 million, and only $2 million higher than the fiscal year 21-22 figure of $945 million. It is worth noting that this $947.1 million includes unplanned expenses as follows: $15 million for the COVID-19 pandemic, a $15 million special grant to support the hospital, additional funds for firefighters at the airport, the government's economic relief measures such as the payroll tax rebate, relief funds to parents of public school students, and the increase in food benefits for those on financial assistance. Despite all of these additional and unplanned expenses that arose during the year, which were necessary as the government provided relief and assistance in the face of global 40-year high global inflation, this government's fiscal discipline was able to keep current expenditure largely in line with the original budget, exceeding it by only 0.2%. Mr. Speaker, interest and guarantee management costs are expected to be $140.6 million, $10.9 million more than originally budgeted, with most of this increase related to one-time costs for debt refinancing, which occurred in the summer of 2022, and continued expenses for Morgan's Point. Capital account expenditures are projected to be $67.4 million, $5.6 million less than originally budgeted, primarily as a result of delays with the refurbishment of Tynes Bay Waste Energy Facility due to supply chain constraints. Mr. Speaker, based on these figures, the 2022-23 budget deficit is expected to be $28 million, which is $42 million below the original estimate of $70 million, and a $38.2 million reduction when compared to the previous fiscal year. It is also important to note, Mr. Speaker, when I delivered last year's budget, the expectation was that the deficit would be $77 million. As such, this $49 million improvement will allow this government more fiscal space in next year's budget to deploy additional resources to shield Bermudians from increased price pressures. Mr. Speaker, this outstanding fiscal performance demonstrates that despite the social economic challenges and significant relief provided during that fiscal year, we have yet again exceeded expectations while remaining on track to reducing our budget deficit towards achieving the balanced budget that was promised in the government's 2020 election platform. Mr. Speaker, before I share the estimates of revenue expenditure for the next fiscal year, I would like to provide an update on the government's financial performance for fiscal year 2023-2024, which is coming to a close next month. The latest revised forecasts project that the government will earn $1.159 billion in revenue in 23-24. This is $3.3 million more than the $1.156 billion in the original estimates. This is primarily due to payroll tax, land tax, and interest on deposits performing better than expected, which were somewhat offset by lower than expected collections on stamp duty fees, passenger tax, and hotel occupancy tax. Mr. Speaker, this revenue performance is on the back of a significant reduction in the tax burden for workers and local businesses, which was estimated at $20 million. All local businesses paid less in payroll tax last year than the year before. And all workers earning under $132,000 a year also paid less in payroll tax than they did in the previous year. Mr. Speaker, the same changes that the opposition branded as irresponsible saw the tax burden fall for every local business and 86% of the workers of this country while still delivering record payroll tax revenue.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, the projected 2023-24 operating expenses of the government, excluding debt service and guarantee management, are $987.2 million, or $14.6 million than the $972.6 million originally budgeted. Significant contributors to the increase are the additional $16.3 million grant to the Bermuda Hospitals Board to meet their funding shortfall, negotiated salary increases for civil servants, but unbudgeted expenses related to the establishment of the corporate income tax framework, and costs associated with the recent cyber attack. Despite these unbudgeted costs, which totaled $46.5 million, ministers have been able to identify savings in their departments that have minimized the overall increase in current account spending. Debt service and guarantee management costs are estimated to be $131.4 million for this year, $1 million above the original estimate of $130.4 million. As a result of the limited availability of construction resources and continued supply chain challenges, capital expenditure for the fiscal year 2023-24 is expected to be $84.1 million, which is 11.9 or 12.4% below the original estimate of $96 million. Despite this shortfall, Mr. Speaker, year over year capital expenditure has increased by $15.9 million. Mr. Speaker, given the figures outlined above, the revised estimate for the overall deficit for 2023-2024 is $43.9 million, or $438,000, or 0.9% more than the $43.5 million deficit originally projected. This result has been achieved despite the aforementioned circumstances and is a testament to the dedicated efforts of the elected government and the public service in exercising financial control to ensure that we can meet our budget targets. As of the 31st of March, 2024, net debt is projected to stand at $3.17 billion. During this fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, it's important to note the government paid $9.7 million out of the sinking fund to repay the Bermuda Game Commission's outstanding credit facility to a local bank, which the government had guaranteed. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn my attention to the budget for the next fiscal year 2024-25, which are the estimates that I'm presenting today, where projected revenue for fiscal year 2024-25 is expected to reach $1.23 billion, which is 66% or $76.8 million above the original estimates for this current fiscal year. Current accounts expenditure is forecasted at $992 million, an increase of $19.4 million or 2% above the original estimates for this current year. The current account balance before debt service is expected to be $240.3 million, which is $57.4 million above the original estimates for the current fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, it is critical that I not only provide the public with the numbers, but also provide some context as to what these numbers mean. Therefore, as a reminder, the current account balance, excluding finance costs and capital expenditure, reflects whether the government's expected revenues will be sufficient to support its day-to-day operations. Mr. Speaker, with the current account balance, we then focus on covering costs associated with servicing our debt and guarantee management, which is projected to be $127.7 million, or $2.6 million, or 2% less than the original budget for this fiscal year. This reduction in interest expense is mostly attributed to the repayment of $50 million of long-term debt last year. Mr. Speaker, after interest expense, the sole remaining expenditure category is capital expenditure. Capital expenditure for fiscal year 2024-25 is forecast to be $112.3 million, which is $16.3 million or 17% more than the current year's original estimate. And this level of capital expenditure is the largest budgeted investment in capital since 2010. Mr. Speaker, when the aforementioned estimates of revenue expenditure are compiled, it is my privilege to state to this honorable House and the people of Bermuda that this progressive Labor Party has successfully balanced Bermuda's budget. With a projected surplus of $210,000. That number has significant meaning, Mr. Speaker, which I'm sure we'll get to over the next few weeks. This budget surplus is only the second budgeted surplus in 35 years. Mr. Speaker, the last time Bermuda achieved a balanced budget was in fiscal year 2002-2003. But today, 21 years after that was last achieved, through the turmoil of a Great Recession and after being battered by a once-in-a-century pandemic, we will return this country back to a balanced budget. Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes how global inflation has challenged so many in our community. Conscious of that fact, this government will not be increasing taxes or introducing any new taxes for any individual or business. Instead, we have focused on growing revenues through economic growth and diversification. Payroll tax receipts are budgeted to see a $58 million improvement as a result of the continued growth in the island's working population, in particular with the international business and construction industries and the revision of the new hire relief that is scheduled to expire at the end of March 2024. Mr. Speaker, the new hire relief was instituted for exempted companies and large employers in 2018 as an economic stimulus measure to promote the hiring of persons in Bermuda. Companies who added to their payroll from April 2018 did not pay employer payroll taxes for their additional employees. During last year's budget presentation, I stated the following. Mr. Speaker, though it is unlikely this successful relief, which has boosted employment numbers, will come to an abrupt end, it must be modified as it cannot be fair for exempted companies that started in 2018 to not pay any employer taxes after 2024, while our long-standing exempted companies continue to pay taxes on employees hired before 2018, end quote. Mr. Speaker, in this year's pre-budget report, the government put out to consultation the options under consideration for the extension of this exemption to solicit feedback from affected employers. After consideration of the overall budget requirements and the need to increase capital account expenditure to tackle Bermuda's infrastructure, the government will extend the new hire relief for a further 2 years to expire in March 2026. However, we will adjust the baseline for the new hire relief from 2018 to 2022. This extension and adjustment to the new hire relief is expected to yield an additional $30 million in payroll tax revenue. Mr. Speaker, last year the government set a target to collect $7.5 million in back taxes, and I'm pleased to report to this honorable House that we have exceeded that target by collecting over $15.7 million, which is more than double the target. This year, the government will continue to advance its efforts towards tax collection through enhanced enforcement and simplified policies and processes. And Mr. Speaker, we've also set a target to collect $10 million for this current year. Mr. Speaker, much of this can be attributed to the investment in a new debt management system, and I would like to commend the team of the Office of the Tax Commissioner for their hard work. This year, the government will implement additional measures to increase tax compliance by proposing legislative amendments to ensure specific government services are suspended for delinquent taxpayers and implementing measures to simplify the tax collection process. The government is also increasing coordination with the Department of Public Prosecutions to advance collection actions against those persons who have been deemed to have the means to pay, but refuse to communicate and or work with the tax commissioner. Moving on to current account expenditure. Mr. Speaker, last year in the budget statement, I said the following, and I quote, "The Cabinet is aware that the current expenditure level this year will carry over to next year, and that any new programs will need to be offset by revisions to existing ones, which in essence makes this a 2-year budget. Current expenditure is projected to increase by 1% over the next 2 fiscal years, which has been inserted solely to take into account possible negotiated salary increases for public officers." End quote. Mr. Speaker, negotiated settlements with our union partners amounted to a $20 million increase to payroll, benefits, and overhead expenses. That increase is incorporated into the current expenditure estimates, which project an increase of $19.4 million to $992 million, compared to last year's figure of $972.6 million. Though this increase was more than was expected last year, we are proud of the agreement reached with our union partners, which provides pay increases for public officers after years of sacrifice following the pandemic. Later in today's presentation, I will detail the highlights of expenditure from various ministries. However, Mr. Speaker, the people can rest assured that this budget funds the priorities laid out in our throne speech to execute our people-focused agenda. Moving on to interest and debt guarantee management fees, Mr. Speaker. In December 2023, the government honored its commitment to repay $50 million of gross debt by making a $50 million bond repayment. This repayment reduced annual interest costs by $2.4 million for the upcoming fiscal year to $127.5 million. Given the number of guarantees that have been made by the government, an additional $250,000 has been set aside to ensure that there is adequate risk management of the guarantee portfolio. The government does not expect to incur any additional guarantee expenses in fiscal year 24-25 related to Fairmont Southampton or for Morgan's Point. Mr. Speaker, I will talk on an important topic to many, which is that of capital expenditure. Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure are funds that are used to purchase, upgrade, or maintain government assets, or an investment deemed necessary by the government for the long-term benefit of the country. This includes the purchasing of new busing of ferries, repaving of our roads, upgrading the government's technology, stabilizing our waste management system, repairing bridges, upgrading our school campuses, improving facilities, our hospital, and further investments in affordable housing. The need to reduce the budget deficit has resulted in continued underinvestment to reach budget targets. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that international standards state that capital expenditure for developed economies should be between 2 to 4% of a country's GDP. The chart below shows how significantly Bermuda has been investing under this amount. Mr. Speaker, despite this year's 15-year high capital account expenditure, totaling $113.2 million, that amount only equates to 1.3% of our GDP. If we were to budget to the amount of capital investment that is recommended by the World Bank, our capital expenditures budget should be $156 million. As our economy continues to strengthen, the investment strategy of the government must be to budget a minimum of 2% GDP on capital expenditure to ensure that we maintain our infrastructure and do not find ourselves in a similar state in 15 years. Mr. Speaker, it is going to take us a while to catch up, as the infrastructure needs are great, whether they be the replacement of our bridges, the replacement of the Tynes Bay waste-to-energy facility, the repaving of our roads, the construction of new healthcare facilities for our seniors, or the building of new schools. Our future financial policies must ensure that we are investing the necessary capital expenditure so our infrastructure does not again get to the state it is today. Moving on to ministry highlights, Mr. Speaker. This budget fulfills its pledge to invest in our people and our island's future. I will now cover the highlights from various ministries that are funded in this budget. It is vital that budgets match the pledges made in our throne speech, and this budget delivers on those priorities. First, Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet Office. The Cabinet Office has been allocated $46.4 million, an increase of $1.7 million when considering the transfer of departments, and the majority of this increase is due to salary uplifts. The Department of Information Digital Technologies has increased a capital funding increase of $2.4 million, or 68%, for upgrades to network infrastructure, cybersecurity, and server upgrades. Additional funding has also been allocated to staff the digital transformation team, which I will cover later, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Planning has received additional funding for additional staff to speed on-site approvals at construction sites. The department will advance policies to further streamline planning approvals and develop an online platform showcasing development opportunities at currently unused sites that have development potential. To promote the use of agricultural zone land, the department has created the Grow Bermuda initiative for landowners to connect with others who are looking for land suitable for farming. The Department of Employee and Organizational Development has received funding to complete the salary review of specialist roles in the public service to ensure that the government can attract and retain experienced talent in key areas such as legal, engineering, compliance, information technology, and finance. Additional funds have been awarded to expand bursaries and training programs to ensure adequate succession planning within government. The Ministry of Legal Affairs. The Ministry of Legal Affairs has been allocated a budget of $332 million, which is a decrease of $11,000. Sorry? 33.2. The Attorney General's chambers will provide the resources and workforce levels necessary to draft effective legislation and provide comprehensive legal advice and representation on behalf of government ministries and departments. The Judicial Department has been awarded capital funding to implement a new electronic case management system to improve efficiency and connectivity within the system. Through the Ministry of Public Works, capital funding has been allocated to complete the renovation of court facilities, the Dame Lois Brown Evans building, which will see all Supreme Court matters vacate Sessions House. You got a tap for that one, Mr. Speaker? And the staff here, I'm sure. The Department of National Drug Control has been allotted $4 million to address substance misuse and abuse, supporting administration, treatment, residential treatment, and prevention programs. Moving on to the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Finance has been allocated $240.5 million, an increase of $4.1 million, primarily due to salary uplifts, increased employer overheads due to union pay agreements, and new funding for corporate income tax implementation. Key priorities for the ministry include advancing pension and tax reform while progressing critical international tax and regulatory reviews. Ministry headquarters will advance the implementation of an agency to administer the new corporate income tax and has received current and capital funds to progress this vital initiative. The Accountant General has received capital funding to implement an online payment portal for easier government payments, and the Department of Social Assistance has received capital funding to upgrade the pension administration system, enabling online applications and search functions. The Office of the Tax Commissioner has received additional capital funding to modernize systems to enhance compliance, collections, and to improve the user experience for online tax payments. The Registrar of Companies has received additional current and capital funding to finalize the beneficial ownership register in line with the European Union's 6th anti-money laundering directive. And the Ministry of Finance will provide a grant of $800,000 to supplement the revenue from the operations of the Bermuda Gaming Commission. The Ministry of Education has been allocated $142.6 million, an increase of $2.7 million due to salary uplifts. Mr. Speaker, there has been $2 million in scholarships and awards allocated for post-secondary education. Important to note, Mr. Speaker, this government increased scholarships while the former government cut scholarships, investing in our future, a point that we should never forget.
Yes.
There has been a $2 million increase in scholarships and award for post-secondary education. And this year, the ministry will fund 3 scholarship awards for students studying at the University of the West Indies.
Yes. Well done. Well done.
And Mr. Speaker, I cannot help but note in the gallery the Honorable Minister from St. Kitts and Nevis, who is here joining us. So yes, absolutely. To increase the level of male teachers in the Bermuda public school system, where they can make significant impacts as role models for our children, this year the ministry will provide awards to assist males in funding teaching practicums.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Bermuda National Library will digitize library resources and hire a youth assistant to aid in improving youth services and complete repairs to shelving in the youth library to ensure the environment is safer for our young readers. Capital funding has been increased by 40% to $6.4 million to support education reform projects, completing developments at Francis Patton, Purvis Primary, commencing transformation of Elliott Primary School, Harrington Sound Primary Schools into Parish Primary Schools, and Sand Secondary Middle School into a signature school for September 2025. Necessary infrastructure repairs are planned for Cedar Bridge Academy, the Bermuda College, and other schools. And the ministry has been awarded funding to continue providing tablets and Chromebooks to public school students. Moving on to the Ministry of Health, Mr. Speaker. The ministry has been allocated $200.4 million, so $200,400,000, an increase of $1.2 million. This modest increase is primarily to cover the costs of negotiated salary increases. The majority of the Ministry of Health's budget is allocated to Bermuda Hospitals Board, and the ministry will provide the Middle Atlantic Wellness Institute with its continual operating grant, which they're using to implement the MWI Directorate Plan, including the Adult Acute Mental Health Pathway, improving access to mental health services, and addressing the stigma associated with mental health and intellectual disability. The Ministry of Health budget includes $112.5 million in BHP patient subsidies for the youth, indigent, and the aged. The BHP will continue to drive quality improvements through its electronic medical record system. This year, the ministry will coordinate the STEPS Population Health Survey and translating data from the STEPS survey and the continuing Heart Risk Management Program will assist in defining the core benefits package for universal health care, which is targeted for launch in July 2025. Funded in part by the Ministry of Health, the Bermuda Health Council will coordinate the implementation of the first 1,000 days care pathway, while the Department of Health will reboot the Well Bermuda initiative focused on preventative health at every level. Additionally, the environmental health section will implement the iDocs data system to automate data collection. Capital funding to the ministry has been increased by 46% to $8.9 million to assist with capital works for the Bermuda Hospitals Board and to complete the renovations for the Mangrove Bay Clinic in Somerset. Moving on to transport, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Transport has been allocated $68.2 million, a decrease of $4.1 million. This decrease is due to the cessation of minimum revenue guarantees to Skyport, offset by increased salary costs due to union agreements. Capital funding has been awarded for the purchase of 2 new ferries. These new vessels will replace existing ferries, modernize the fleet, and meeting the increased demand for efficient, reliable, and sustainable transportation options. Work will continue on the replacement of floating docks for ferry landings and the Marine Imports Workshop. Additionally, digital fare media will be implemented for bus and ferries, marking a milestone in public transportation by introducing a more efficient and convenient payment system. On now, Mr. Speaker, to the Ministry of Public Works. The Ministry of Public Works has been allocated $77.3 million, an increase of $2.1 million, primarily for salary uplifts. The ministry's capital budget has been increased by $8.4 million to $56.5 million. Mr. Speaker, the government acknowledges the community's concern and frustration with the poor state of roads and is committed to restoring them to an acceptable standard. To address the widespread issues of public road conditions across the island, the road paving budget has been more than doubled to $5 million, and additional capital funds have been allocated to procure a new asphalt plant and related equipment, as well as training and development for highways personnel to ensure more frequent, efficient, and cost-effective roadworks. Capital funding has been awarded to combat the issue of affordable housing by increasing the grant to Bermuda Housing Corporation. Investment will continue in the aging Tynes Bay facility infrastructure to ensure its operational efficiency, while plans for a full refurbishment are underway. Additional capital investment is allocated for stabilizing major walls and rock faces along highways, developing rooftop solar across government buildings to reduce energy costs, commencing the replacement of Swin Bridge, which is scheduled to start, Mr. Speaker, in April of 2025, but the preliminary money is being put now so we can get mobilized and get ready to start, and expanding the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Furthermore, work will commence on a new Department of Parks maintenance facility for the staff responsible for preserving the island's natural beauty. The Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport has been allocated $29.6 million, which is a decrease of $741,000 when considering the transfer of departments. Mr. Speaker, the grant to the Bermuda Tourism Authority has been reduced, and funding has been redirected towards increased funding in other priority areas. With these funds, the ministry has increased funding for grants for cultural and entertainment events to enhance interactions between visitors and locals, increased funding for elite athletes through grants and increased access to National Sports Center, will increase funding to expand the availability and accessibility of affordable summer camp programs, and the minister tells me the objective is to eliminate the wait lists, and increase funding for sports development in line with the national sports policy. As promised in the throne speech, capital funding has been awarded for the establishment of maker spaces to create collaborative workspace for artists and creatives, and operational funding has also been allocated to support this initiative. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of National Security has been allocated $137.8 million, an increase of $66.4 million. The majority of this increase is due to negotiated salary uplifts, with some funding for new programs. New programs include the implementation of a uniform services training program to improve Bermudian readiness for the uniformed services, recruitment of cybersecurity posts, and a disaster coordinator for the disaster risk reduction and mitigation team in the ministry headquarters. Funding has been allocated to fill vacant posts in the Bermuda Police Service, Customs Department, and the Department of Corrections, and the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service. Capital funding has been increased by 19% to $6.5 million for refurbishing police headquarters, purchasing new vehicles and computers, and upgrading network servers. Additionally, those funds will be used for the construction of new Coast Guard shed and security upgrades at the Westgate Correctional Facility, including a full body scanner. And also, Mr. Speaker, these funds will be used to purchase 4 specially designed trucks for the L.F. Wade International Airport for the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Home Affairs has been allocated $15.5 million, an increase of $747,000, primarily for salary uplifts. The funds will support various initiatives aimed at improving customer service and advancing key government programs. Specifically, new funding will be used to recruit an additional land title and registry officer to expedite property adjudication. capital funding has been awarded to commence the long-awaited redevelopment of the Agriculture Marketing Center, a critical element to the integrated agriculture strategy and a necessary facility to support increased domestic food production. Digital projects will also be advanced in the ministry, such as the revaluation of all properties for land tax purposes, which will feature a digital questionnaire. Applications for vital records under the Registry General will move online, along with forms for dog licensing and relicensing. The Ministry of Economy and Labor has been allocated $23.9 million, an increase of $843,000, primarily allocated for salary uplifts and economic development strategy initiatives. The ministry's focus includes leading policy and legislative initiatives on immigration workers' rights, a new family office framework, and monitoring the economic recovery plan. The Department of Statistics will complete the 2024 Household Income Expenditure Survey, while capital funding has been awarded to the Department of Immigration for digitization to improve service delivery. The Department of Workforce Development will expand the post-secondary summer employment program and continue supporting job seekers. The Economic Development Department will advance fintech development and support grants to the Bermuda Business Development Agency and Bermuda Economic Development Corporation. Finally, the Department of Labor will continue to enforce the statutory minimum wage and new tips and gratuities legislation, promoting labor standards and fundamental rights at work. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Youth, Social Development, and Seniors. The Ministry of Youth, Social Development, and Seniors has been allocated $85.3 million, an increase of $1.45 million when considering the transfer of departments. This increase is primarily for salary uplifts and new programs to support vulnerable populations represented by this ministry. Initiatives include the introduction of a disability register app, continuation of the Dementia Care Services pilot program, development of a 5-year domestic abuse strategy, and increased grants to residential homes and third sector organizations serving seniors and disabled populations. The Office of Youth Affairs will focus on national youth policy initiatives, emphasizing charge safeguarding policies for youth organizations. Aging and Disability Services will develop a case management system with a focus on strengths and needs assessment. Funding has been awarded to start a new child safeguarding program under the Department of Child and Family Services, and additional funding has been granted to enhance the delivery of the independent living program. Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, this budget funds our major priorities in line with the theme of investing in our people and our future. Mr. Speaker, I'll now move on to the next section, which is entitled Balancing a Budget with No New Taxes.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker,
Tell us how we're going to do it.
after years of deficits, austerity, and underinvestment in our people and our infrastructure, Bermuda was on an unsustainable path that placed a heavy and unfair burden on Bermudians today, and an even heavier burden on future generations. These issues were then exacerbated by a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that further increased our debt, devastated a key economic pillar, and disrupted the very order of our society. Mr. Speaker, in response to the hand we were dealt, this government accepted the responsibility of restoring economic stability and exercising fiscal prudence during these unprecedented times. As a result, we have positioned ourselves to deliver a budget surplus, which would not only be the first government surplus in over 20 years, but we have also reached this milestone before the collection of any corporate income tax.
Yes. Well done.
Mr. Speaker, achieving a balanced budget in this economic climate was incredibly difficult. As the world continues to grapple with the aftershocks of the pandemic, foreign wars, rising interest rates, and continued supply chain challenges, we took on the unenviable task of formulating a budget in an inflationary environment, amongst competing priorities and limited resources. This balanced budget was achieved with careful planning and without raising or introducing any new taxes. In fact, we reached this balanced budget after reducing taxes for 86% of the workers and all local business in Bermuda. That, Mr. Speaker, is how you build a better and fairer Bermuda. Despite the picture the opposition tries to paint, this could only be possible through economic growth, job creation, and improving tourism industry and increase foreign investment. By implementing policies that focus on economic growth instead of austerity, we have successfully reached our intermediate objective and will capitalize on this achievement to ensure as a country that we continue to reduce the burden on working families. Think back to what we've overcome. Remember how the COVID-19 pandemic took our health, took our loved ones, took our jobs, shut down our airport, left our hotel sitting empty, and had our hospital on its highest disaster alert level. Our GDP was declining, and the government was borrowing funds to provide much needed financial support to Bermudian families and businesses. Mr. Speaker, there was no blueprint on how to deal with a pandemic, and certainly no blueprint on how to recover from one. However, within 3 years, we have already begun the path of reducing our debt, established fundamental tax reform legislation, and with this balanced budget, Mr. Speaker, we are on the verge of a new era.
Yes, yes.
The next section, Mr. Speaker, is entitled Sharing the Benefit of Collective Sacrifice. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, the government borrowed funds to ensure Bermudian families in need could keep their lights on and had food on their tables. At that time, we expected to accumulate $408 million in deficits prior to reaching a balanced budget. However, due to our sound financial management, combined with significant economic growth, we only accumulated $322 million of deficits over the past 4 years, leaving us with $89 million more in the bank than we expected just a few years ago. Mr. Speaker, compared to 1 year ago, we are $49 million ahead of where we thought we would be to this government's prudent management of the economy and public finances. Mr. Speaker, the funds that we borrowed in 2020 are sitting in an account, earning interest, and the law requires that they can only be invested or used to fund future deficits. However, with the advent of a balanced budget and future projected surpluses, there is no expectation that there will be significant deficits to fund in the future. Now, Mr. Speaker, we can look at those figures and pat ourselves on the back, but there remain real needs that the government must address. Some may say it is important or more important to keep that extra $89 million in the bank, allowing healthcare costs to go up and allowing Bermudian cries for more affordable housing to go unanswered. However, in this government, we have a different philosophy, and our values built up over 6 years of history tell us that the cries of our people must be answered.
Yes, yes, yes. They will be. Tell us how.
Mr. Speaker, keeping significant contingency funds was fine for a time when a balanced budget was not a near-term prospect, for a time when there was no global minimum tax on the horizon. But today is different. Today, we must do all that we can to assist Bermudians who are feeling the pinch today and who do not want a government that will just pass on costs to them, especially so when the government has the fiscal space to provide relief. Therefore, the government intends to bring legislation to amend the Government Loans Act to enable the transfer of funds from the excess borrowing account if those funds would not be required to meet deficit spending. Mr. Speaker, it is this government's intention to use $40 million of the funds in the excess borrowing account to do the following. The first, Mr. Speaker, is a freeze on government health insurance premiums for the third year in a row.
All right.
Mr. Speaker, the government's actuaries have advised the Ministry of Health that in order to keep up with health insurance claims, which continue to escalate due to our aging population, the government will have to increase health insurance rates by $45 a month.
No. Say something.
This government cannot and will not allow that to happen.
Yes.
Therefore, we intend to transfer $30 million from the excess borrowing fund to the mutual reinsurance fund to ensure that our health funds are able to pay claims without asking every resident of Bermuda that has a health insurance policy to pay $540 extra a year.
Yes. Yes. Well done.
What does this mean, Mr. Speaker? It means, as I stated, for the third year in a row, this government will freeze the standard premium rate that all persons in Bermuda with health insurance must pay. This will shield residents and employers from government-mandated premium increases this year. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's economic growth is increasing affordable housing pressures throughout the island, and we see the pain that it is inflicting on working Bermudians. If we were to do nothing, the problem would only get worse, and it could negatively impact economic growth, which will hurt the very Bermudians challenged to find affordable housing today. Again, we are not prepared to let that happen. 2 years ago, the government committed to investing $15 million in affordable housing. However, it is our view that we need to go further to ensure that we provide more affordable options. Therefore, the government will invest an additional $10 million into Bermudian Housing Corporation to accelerate the provision of affordable housing and enable a significant expansion of the private sector rental program. This will bring more rental units online faster so that we can relieve the housing pressure for Bermudians. And, Mr. Speaker, this is an investment in growth. Mr. Speaker, this government values demand that the people of Bermuda deserve to benefit from their sacrifices in recent years. And with our holding the line on health insurance costs and creating more housing for our people, we will ensure that they do. For many years, Bermudians have been used to the term shared sacrifice. Today, this government is ensuring that there is shared benefit for all due to the many years of sacrifice required to return our country's books to balance. Mr. Speaker, next section is entitled, Let's Debate Policies, Not People.
Yes, very good advice. Very good advice. Tell us more about it. Very good advice.
Mr. Speaker, over the next month, honorable members will dissect the budget proposals the government is delivering today. Next week, there will be a reply from the opposition. And if the last few years are anything to go by, they will denigrate the real and tangible evidence that Bermuda is heading in the right direction. They will try to paint our long-standing belief in caring for our people and prioritizing workers as an election budget. History has shown us that the presentation we'll hear next week will likely be laced with personal attacks, racial innuendo, unsubstantiated accusations of corruptions, and cynical and hypocritical accusations of friends and families schemes, all devoid of any alternative plan for the future. That's what history shows us, Mr. Speaker.
It's all in the print.
We will see them wrapping themselves in the cloak of social conscience, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, all while putting themselves as a champion of working Bermudians, when their actions in government reveal what they truly represent. Let us not forget, Mr. Speaker, Last year, the opposition rolled back the main pledges in their budget reply before the weekend was even over.
That's right. That's right.
Let us not forget that His Majesty's loyal opposition called for a new tax on healthcare, a tax that would have driven up the cost of healthcare and inflicted pains on Bermudian families. And next week, they will try to present themselves as having some sort of newfound social conscience. The opposition called for the reintroduction of the travel authorization fee to further drive up the cost of traveling to Bermuda and inflict further pain on our tourism industry and our Bermudian families.
I can't believe it.
They rolled that back too, Mr. Speaker.
They said that.
And the opposition spoke against the payroll tax changes that we made, which reduced the burden of payroll taxes for 86% of workers in this country and every local business in Bermuda. They called them, Mr. Speaker, irresponsible. Imagine that. Cutting taxes for 86% of the people in the country and every business that they brand as irresponsible.
Really?
We understand why they took the side of some business groups in opposition to us, giving relief to hardworking families. As in 2016, they raised payroll taxes on workers to the highest level in Bermuda's history, inflicting hardship on many in Bermuda.
Tax and spend.
And yes, Mr. Speaker, we've heard the MAGA rhetoric from the OBA, and hearing it with a Bermudian accent doesn't make it any more appealing or less repugnant. Accusing political enemies of everything under the sun with zero evidence. Dog whistle narratives, claims about saving Bermuda. The truth is, beyond the opening of the immigration floodgates, raising taxes on workers, and reducing investment in public services, they have no plan.
No plan, Mr. Speaker.
They will try to downplay the achievement of a balanced budget, even though they couldn't do it, and know full well the positive impact it will have for our people in our country. They will try to downplay the fact that international business employment has hit the highest level in Bermuda's history. And, Mr. Speaker, this is the new one. They will say that we need to make Bermuda a place of yes and not a place of no. And yet at every turn, when the government advances a matter, they will say no. No to vertical farming, no to tax reform, no to the Fairmont STO, no to taller buildings in Hamilton. They'll even say no to a food truck in Flats.
Really? Really? I can't believe it, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, they are the party of no. More interested in protecting the status quo and the preservation of the elite and privileged than supporting action that will benefit hardworking Bermudians. They're more interested in opposing than providing an alternative. They talk out of both sides of their mouth, all the time thinking that our Bermudian people will forget about their record, their behavior, and their approach during their disastrous single term in office. Mr. Speaker, when I say talk out of both sides of their mouth, let's take the example of the former Premier and Shadow Minister of Public Works, my good friend, by the way, Mr. Speaker, who recently declared that the Bermudiana Beach should be a housing development and not a hotel. Mr. Speaker, this government inherited that property with a change in plan to convert it to a hotel that the former Premier himself came up with. The plan that he created in 2015 was to turn the site to a hotel, and when we came into office, that is how we found it. Now, Mr. Speaker, could we have changed it to public housing in 2018? Absolutely. And with the benefit of hindsight, especially given the housing condition of the country today, it is arguable that we could have chosen a different course. However, it is important to remember that the housing market in 2018 was completely different, where there were many vacant apartments to rent. So I'm not going to deny that this project has cost more money than we wanted to done. However, let there be no doubt that we will deliver a successful hotel that will create jobs and will boost our economy. Now, let me go on, Mr. Speaker, because I want to speak to another issue that the combined opposition likes to peddle, and that is accusations of corruption. Over the last 6 years, we have achieved high international rankings due to our work, diligence, and focus on making sure that Bermuda is a premier anti-money laundering jurisdiction. We are globally recognized to have strong rules, low corruption, operational independence of our police, judiciary, prosecution services, and our financial regulator. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is galling that the opposition, who did not invest the needed attention to these assessments and had multiple scandals involving government ministers, would attempt to cast a veneer of corruption when there has never been a single shred of evidence at any point in time in any way, shape, or form on impropriety from members of this government. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. If we are to have a real policy debate and build our country for the future, we must stop with the silly and false innuendos of corruption. We have an independent police service that is empowered to investigate such crimes, and it is not under the control of the PLP government, but under the control of the United Kingdom. And if the One Bermuda Alliance believes for 1 second that the UK government would ignore any impropriety by any member of this PLP government, they are fooling themselves, or maybe they are simply attempting to mislead Bermudians. So here's what I'll say, Mr. Speaker. The opposition talks a good game, but in reality, they seem to have little or no concern for the country's future. It will denigrate the reputation of the country by peddling WhatsApp rumor and innuendo. And we all know the reasons why. To gain power, so they can change the rules to ensure that person that they're choosing or granting status, to ensure that taxes on working people are raised again, and to ensure that there is a reduction of investment in public spending, which will impact the vulnerable and the middle class. Mr. Speaker, it's their people who are saying reduce government expenditure, not me. Mr. Speaker, we challenge the opposition to next week come to this House and say exactly how many jobs they will slash the public service to fulfill their promise of, and I quote, reduce government expenditure. We challenge them to tell Bermudians what social programs or grants they will purge. They may choose not to tell us, but their history speaks louder than whatever they are claiming today or will claim next week. Mr. Speaker, our people deserve more than just platitudes from the opposition, consultant-driven slogans, and vague words like back to basics. If they want to govern this country, then they should tell the voters exactly what they will do and not try to scurry away from their own words and deeds the weekend after they announce them when they find out how unpopular they are. Mr. Speaker, our progressive Labor Party government may not always get it right. I am the first to admit that. We get that. Human beings make mistakes. But our hearts are in the right place with our Bermudian people. Where we have gotten it wrong, we humbly apologize and commit to learning, growing, listening, and serving the people even better. Mr. Speaker, with our balanced budget, setting the stage for a prosperous future, we can look ahead with optimism, and the people of Bermuda can have confidence that when it comes time to making budgeting decisions, this progressive Labor Party government will always put the needs of Bermuda's workers first.
Yes, yes. People love the people, Mr. Speaker. People love the people.
Looking into the future. You like that, didn't you, Greg? Good to see you. Looking to the future. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget for the future. This is a budget that invests in our people so that they can achieve success. It is a budget that begins to restore our roads to their proper state. It is a budget that meets the Fiscal Responsibility Panel's target of delivering a $50 million surplus by fiscal year 26-27. And it is critical to note that this government has projected this outcome without the benefits of the global minimum tax. With that being said, Ms. Speaker, and as this presentation today is the beginning of our general economic debate, And as budget presentations include projections for the next 3 years, it would be remiss of me if I did not share the initial projections from the Ministry of Finance based upon what the country can expect in the future following the implementation of the corporate income tax, developed to address global minimum tax requirements. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't want us to get carried away because there could be a delay in the implementation of the global minimum tax. There may not be significant tax revenues that accrue initially, and it remains to be seen what the final recommendations from the Tax Reform Commission will be. However, it is undeniable that there is expected to be an additional source of revenue that will accrue to the government of Bermuda. And as we are debating how our country should go forward, I am happy on behalf of this government to present our initial views for the next 2 fiscal years. Let me say at the outset, I know that there are those who will criticize the government for looking forward, but in my opinion, that is mere politics. I say that, Mr. Speaker, because if we are to be open with the people who send us to this honorable house, then we must present a picture on how we view the future. Those Bermudians who have made sacrifices under a tax system that many consider unfair and are challenged to make ends meet need realistic hope and confidence that things can and will get better. And they need to not just hear words, but to see how we will get to that place of relief. As I have said in this honorable house on numerous occasions, Mr. Speaker, there will be no meaningful reduction of the cost of living in Bermuda without significant tax reform. And any politician who says otherwise is not being truthful. Mr. Speaker, that time has now come, and the corporate income tax is the start of significant tax reform. The Tax Reform Commission, chaired by Mr. Darren Johnston, will be presenting a set of recommendations on how best to distribute the benefits of the additional revenue and the guardrails that must be put in place, given that revenues from the corporate income tax may be variable. The Commission will also be making recommendations on what should happen with any funds that are in excess of what is estimated to be collected in any given year and how funds received can be used to reduce Bermuda's long-term debt. And Mr. Speaker, that brings me to my next point. Last year, in my opinion, the opposition tried to seize headlines and divert attention from the corporate income tax debate to discuss what should be done with the excess revenues. This was done under the guise that if nothing is done, any government has free access to spending excess revenues. Here is the problem with that formulation, Mr. Speaker. No funds that have been collected by the government can be spent unless they are appropriated by this honorable house. That's right, Mr. Speaker. The amendment meant nothing because if there were excess revenues over and above what may accrue in any given year, those revenues could not be spent without an act of Parliament or a resolution of this House. So, Mr. Speaker, given that fallacy has now been laid to rest, let us look to the future. Mr. Speaker, the estimates of CIT revenue that have come to the Ministry of Finance and that have been shared with the Tax Reform Commission is that the government should expect to receive, on average, at least $750 million in additional revenue each year, and the initial tax payments on account from the CIT could commence by July 2025. Mr. Speaker, earlier I presented the medium-term expenditure framework for the next 3 years for the Consolidated Fund. And as I said, this demonstrated that the government would achieve the $50 million surplus recommended by the Fiscal Responsibility Panel. However, with the advent of the global minimum tax, there is the expectation that the government will receive additional revenue. Even if the government were only to receive half of the estimated cash flows that our advisors have stated could come to Bermuda in the next 2 fiscal years, that will equate to $187.5 million in fiscal year 25-26 and $375 million in fiscal year 26-27. Meaning, Mr. Speaker, there will be significant additional funds. It is important that we adopt a conservative mindset towards additional revenues, as there are many uncertainties, especially with the package of qualified refundable tax credits that will be recommended by the Tax Reform Commission and the government's stated view that companies in scope of the global minimum tax will not be liable for employer payroll taxes. Notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, there are urgent needs in our community. The need for tax relief for workers and businesses, the needs for investment or infrastructure, the need for relief from high electricity and food prices, and most importantly, Mr. Speaker, the cost of healthcare. Given the Tax Reform Commission is doing its work, it would not be fair, in light of the countless of hours of work that they are dedicating, for me to provide specific numbers as we generally await their recommendations. But I want to make sure that I provide an indication of what the future is likely to hold for our residents and our businesses. First, with fiscal year 25-26, Mr. Speaker, which is the next fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, if the $187.5 million of CI2 revenue is available in fiscal year 25-26, it is this government's view that we must take care of the most pressing issue that affects the most people, and that is the cost of living. The government is committed to implementing universal health care. It will be important to see a new health insurance fund with an injection of capital. This will benefit all residents and businesses in Bermuda, as reduced health insurance costs make Bermuda's economy more competitive. Additionally, there is the immediate need to reduce the burden of taxation, which directly feeds to higher prices. There will be an opportunity to reduce or eliminate customs duty on fuel imports, which could save the average household up to $300 a year. Food and other necessities are expensive, and though the government has eliminated duty on 33 staple good and food categories, there are hundreds of other essential items where duty can be eliminated that will result in lower prices. Another important consideration for customs duty, Mr. Speaker, is the cost of construction, which is driving increases in home insurance policies. Mr. Speaker, earlier I spoke about the need to boost capital expenditure up to 2% of GDP, and it will be vital that additional funds go to infrastructure to progress projects that have been delayed due to our pursuit of a balanced budget. Moving to fiscal year 26-27, Mr. Speaker, with expectations of at least $375 million of additional revenue, there will be the ability to provide even more relief. With this increased revenue, there would be the ability to further support healthcare, which would further reduce the burden on families and businesses, invest even more funds in capital upgrades, which may see Bermuda reach the 2% capital investment target, while providing even more relief to tackle the cost of living and the cost of doing business. Our goal is to deliver relief to those struggling to keep up, and we will deliver on that commitment. One of the challenges in operating a business in Bermuda is employer payroll tax, which is a tax on employment. By fiscal year 26-27, there will be the capacity to lower employer payroll taxes to reduce this burden on employers, which can only assist in bringing down the cost of doing business while boosting economic growth. The revenue expectation for fiscal year 26-27 should allow for even wider reductions in customs duty. And these further reductions will not only assist consumers, but also our local retailers, as we'll be paying less money up front for the importation of the highest volumes of goods, which means that they can be more competitive. Another critical need that must be considered is Bermuda's social insurance system. State pensions around the world are challenged as populations age and people live longer. But there is an opportunity for those revenues to support the topping up of the contributory pension fund to minimize the increases required on businesses and residents to make the fund whole. Now, Mr. Speaker, these are the possibilities based on the conservative estimates of revenue from the global minimum tax. However, the Tax Reform Commission will be making recommendations on how to ensure that we can smooth tax collections and the best manner to invest and deploy funds received. as we've only estimated 50% of what government advisors said we could expect to receive, should the collections meet or exceed the estimates, there will be excess revenues above what is budgeted for in a single year. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is important that the government will continue its prudent and considered approach to debt management, recognizing the significant impact of interest expense on our budget. Although the next tranche of debt does not mature until 2027, the government will collaborate with its advisors as appropriate and subject to the recommendation of the Tax Reform Commission, channel excess cash flows to the early repayment of debt. It is the intention of this government to bring legislation to this honorable House in next year's budget to enshrine the recommendations of the Tax Reform Commission. This will ensure that the excess funds received from the global minimum tax are invested and preserved for future years with the necessary protections so that they can benefit all Bermudians. Mr. Speaker, I have set out the government's position so that the stakeholders of this country understand the direction of travel. It is one of fiscal responsibility and appropriate collaboration, married with the need to ensure that we reduce the cost of living and reduce the tax burden on the hard-working men and women of this country. Our position will also ensure that we increase investments in infrastructure, provide affordable health care to all Bermudians, and that our social insurance system exists for future generations. Mr. Speaker, as we think about future generations, and now I'm speaking about pension funds, Mr. Speaker, we must recognize that a result of persons living longer and the amounts of benefits paid not match the level of contributions, there are significant actuarial funding gaps in government's public service superannuation fund. Mr. Speaker, these gaps have been highlighted on several occasions by the government and its advisors as a key issue that threatens the very solvency of these funds. The urgency of this matter is amplified as it becomes increasingly difficult to reach the solution as time goes on and the gap increases. Mr. Speaker, over the last few years, the government has been working with the Public Funds Investment Committee to reform our pension system. I am pleased to announce that following consultation with our public sector unions, the Cabinet has now approved the recommendations for the revisions to the PSSF, to which the unions have given broad support to ensure that this fund is sustainable in the future while reducing the contingent liability on the consolidated fund. Mr. Speaker, whilst we are pleased to advance the sustainability of the PSSF, the government continues to advance its consultation regarding the necessary amendments that will also make the contributory pension fund, commonly known as social insurance, sustainable. Similar to the PSSF, the recommendation will include some variation of an increase in retirement age and increase in contributions. The funding gap for the CPF is larger and more difficult to resolve. However, given the rapidly aging population and persons living longer, meaning they draw more benefits over time, we are confident that we can achieve a solution that will ensure social insurance benefits are there for future generations. Earlier, Mr. Speaker, I indicated that the topping up of this fund could be a prime candidate for revenues that may accrue to the government from the corporate income tax. This is not my idea, Mr. Speaker, but a suggestion that has come to the government as part of the ongoing consultation with our local and international business representatives. The rationale is a good one, that social insurance is for all persons, and Bermuda is a critical need for long-term stability. Moving on, Mr. Speaker, to improving government services. Mr. Speaker, the theme of this year's throne speech was service to the people. And in order to better serve the people, we must improve the delivery of government services. Investing in information technology. Mr. Speaker, honorable members are well aware that the government was the target of a malicious and deliberate cyber attack in September, which severely crippled government systems. Before I go further, I would like to pay tribute to the dedication of the public servants who worked diligently, not only to repair the damage, but also delivered public services under extremely trying conditions without the computer systems that would normally be used to deliver those services. Over the past few years, the government has significantly ramped up capital spending to invest in its IT infrastructure. The chart below shows that since coming to office, we've significantly boosted capital investment. However, this level of increase was not enough, and we must redouble our efforts to ensure that the government can be better protected in the future as cyber threats continue to increase. While we are rebuilding our system to be more resilient, we must also make sure that we're investing in new technologies that can enable us to deliver government services more effectively. Artificial intelligence, Mr. Speaker. Recent years have represented significant advances in artificial intelligence. It is incumbent upon the government to harness this technology and to invest in education and training for public officers so they can utilize artificial intelligence to deliver public services more efficiently. Mr. Speaker, during the throne speech, the government committed to improving public services, including the customer service experience with those that interact with the government have. There is no doubt that artificial intelligence can assist us in delivering that goal. And this budget funds a digital transformation team that will work to roll out artificial intelligence-powered improvements to government services. The government has targeted the first department that will benefit from AI-powered services to be the Department of Immigration. Working with a local company that has implemented successful artificial intelligence-powered processing for local insurance companies, will utilize similar technologies to aid the vetting of applications to ensure that frontline workers can be reassigned to other more complex tasks that will increase the efficiency in the department. I would like to thank the Association of Bermuda International Companies for answering the call to assist the government of Bermuda by identifying a partner to advance its government's ambitions to ensure that we deliver public services more efficiently. Former Premier Alex Scott said, and I quote, "Bermuda works best when we work together," end quote. And there can be no better example of working together than using the local expertise that powers our global insurance industry to improve the efficiency of public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that artificial intelligence is not a method to replace workers, but a tool to enhance the productivity of our dedicated public servants so that they can serve the people of Bermuda better. Continued deployment of artificial intelligence in government departments will not only enable us to serve the people of Bermuda more efficiently, but as our economy continues to expand, it will reduce the pressures of hiring additional persons to complete the various tasks of government. Increased use of cloud computing. One of the lessons of the cyber attack was that our on-premise systems cannot always reliably be maintained, especially when there is a lack of continuous infrastructure investment. This budget also funds the moving of the government's email systems to the cloud with modern applications to ensure that in the event of any future attack, the government's core email system will still function and we will be able to communicate. Artificial intelligence systems require that data be in the cloud, and the increase in funding to IDT will commence that process this year. Reducing regulations to boost economic growth. Mr. Speaker, in alignment with a strategic initiative from the Economic Development Strategy, ensuring Bermuda is business friendly, and its associated action item, reduce outdated regulation that may hamper business expansion. It is vital that we reduce red tape and speed the delivery and approvals of government services. The aforementioned AI initiative will assist, but AI can only go as far as the regulations allow. In that regard, the government has on numerous occasions reached out to private sector organizations to ask them to submit suggestions regarding regulation that could be streamlined or reduced to boost economic activity. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the response has been limited, and therefore the government is going directly to the public. In March, we'll launch a consultation on forum.gov.bm, encouraging citizens to share their experiences with what they would consider unnecessary red tape, as this government is committed to making government work better. And finally, Mr. Speaker, reform of the public service. Mr. Speaker, to ensure we deliver better public services, we must accelerate reforms to the public service. I would like to thank the longtime head of the public service, Dr. Derek Binns, who retired last year, for commencing the initiative of public service reform. Our new head of the public service, Ms. Sherilyn Witter, has hit the ground running and is advancing a number of the reform initiatives which are necessary to ensure that government can perform better. One such initiative being completed is the upgrading and modernization of the Public Service Commission regulations. This is necessary to ensure that line managers in departments and ministries can better manage their staff. There are many processes that currently take too long in government, whether that be hiring or disciplinary. These changes will streamline these processes while adhering to Bermuda's existing constitutional order to ensure that the government's mantra of service to the people can be delivered. Move on to acknowledgements, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I conclude my presentation today, I must thank the persons who made this balanced budget possible. I stand here as a representative of this government, and though I deliver the speech, many others have done the work. I wish to pay homage to the ministers, the public service executive, the heads of departments, the ministry controllers who have labored to ensure that we complete the estimates of revenue expenditure in good time. I would like to thank honorable members of the government backbenches who have held the government's feet to the fire, ensuring that the priorities of the government match the feedback from the doorstep. I would like to extend a special thank you to the members of the Budget Office, led by the Budget Director, Ms. Tina Tucker, who is with us today, who work with ministries to ensure budget control. Certainly thank you also to the Junior Minister of Finance, Senator Arietta Hodgson, and MP Jashay Adams, who have worked tirelessly to assist me in producing this year's budget book. And also I must thank the communications team who ensure that the documents are printed and delivered on time. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to thank our union partners who have made sacrifices over the years to ensure that we can achieve this balanced budget today. It has not been easy, as for many years, public officers worked in departments that have been understaffed, under-resourced, and often working with old and outdated technology. They have borne the brunt of the discipline which has been necessary to return our budget to a balanced one. And I thank them for their collaboration as we've navigated the last 6.5 years together. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I wish to give special recognition to someone who has provided invaluable support to myself, certainly to the former Minister of Finance, and to this government and to this country. For the last 3 years, Ms. Cheryl Ann Lister, OBE, has served this country as acting financial secretary, stepping into the role due to untimely circumstances, but as she has done time and time again in her career, answered the call to service. During this time, she has mentored the team, reorganized the ministry so it is fit to face future threats to this country, and has done it all with her firm but loving demeanor. Ms. Lister will be stepping down from the role at the end of March, but during her 3 years, she has left an indelible mark within the Ministry of Finance. So, Ms. Lister, on behalf of this government and honorable members all here, I want to thank you for your hard work, guidance, selflessness, expertise, and commitment to our country. You are a gem to us all, and look forward to your continued advice as you support and mentor your successor. And yes, that was not in the drafts. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, so often in political service, we must devise words to inspire the people we are elected or appointed to serve. But words are cold comfort to those who are confronted with the realities of life in a challenging economy. In this budget, Mr. Speaker, the government demonstrates that beyond words, there is endeavor and commitment. We have delivered results to the benefit of Bermuda and its people, and those facts speak for themselves. The promises we made have been delivered, and where not delivered are well in train. Mr. Speaker, those results have now positioned us to go from strength to strength. Mr. Speaker, there have been late nights working and poring over figures and consistent canvassing to hear directly from the people. And we have listened. We have applied fiscal discipline guided by a focus on equity and fairness and a determination to put Bermudians first. It is a humbling experience to see vision become reality. And through the investments we make in that budget, that reality will become one of broader success among more and more Bermudians. This work is not for the sprinter. It is a marathon, demanding discipline and focus. Mr. Speaker, we have invested in building our economy. We have sacrificed to balance our budget. Now we must expand our investment in Bermuda's greatest asset, our people, to build that bright future. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is my honor and privilege, on behalf of this Progressive Labor Party government, and on behalf of all of the members and supporters who have continued to keep the faith with us during this difficult task of returning our country to the path of stability and prosperity, I proudly commend the estimates of revenue and expenditure for fiscal year 2024-25 to this honorable House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.